Hello and welcome back to my chaotic craft room. Today we're going to be sewing up the birdie shirt that we trialled last week. So let's get going. Okay, so there were some adjustments that needed to be made to the paper pieces of the birdie shirt pattern so that it fitted my body a little bit better. So let's get to making those adjustments. Okay, so first adjustment I'm going to make is on the arm side. I'm going to do the same adjustment on the front and the back. I've marked on the pattern the area where I was getting the pulling. So I'm going to add in about 1/2 inch extra in that area and taper it out, because under the arm was fitting fine. So I'm going to taper it out under the arm and taper it out up to the shoulder point as well, because that wasn't too bad. I've already stuck a bit of paper underneath. So I'll mark out the distance around about here, which is where the worst of the pulling was, and then use my French curve to even it out. Now this is going to make a little bit of a difference to how the sleeve fits in, but because the sleeve head is gathered and there was plenty of room in it, it wasn't hugely gathered in there. The 12, I'll just grab that actually. So here's the sleeve head. There's not a huge amount of gathering going on. It's a little bit gathered just to sort of ease it in. But there's not like masses and masses of poofy gathering there. So I can get away with a little bit more poofiness. The point where the arm side is going to be coming out to is a little bit more onto the arm. So the circumference that's needed is going to be slightly less for movement. So I'm not concerned about the amount of difference it's going to make to the shape of the arm side and how the sleeve fits in. I don't think it's, in the grand scheme of things, going to impact movement too much. And I have a little plan up my sleeve if it does anyway. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, so I'm going to add that on and mark it in. Okay, so I've marked in the new curve. Yes, it is coming slightly under here, but if I need to adjust where the stitch line is after trying it on, I can do that. That's not a problem. But I don't think I'm going to need to. I think that's going to fit quite nicely. And yeah, as I say, I do have a little plan up my back sleeve, or in my back pocket even. Up my sleeve, in my back pocket, whichever idiom you want to go with. That if this does impact on the range of movement, which I don't think it will, then I can always open up the side seam and the side seam here and the underarm seam here and add in a little gusset, but I don't think it's going to come to that. So that's the arm side on the front marked. I will obviously do the same on the back. I haven't cut out the excess fabric yet because I'm going to move on to adjusting the dart position. I could, if I wanted to, cut a box around the dart and slide it down the 1/2 inch to get to the height that I wanted, but I also want to shorten the dart, so that's not necessarily going to achieve what I want it to achieve. I could simply reposition the bust dart point to about here-ish. Obviously I'll measure it before I do it, and keep the legs in the same place, so change the angle of it. Or I could reposition it completely, keep the width the same, and just lower it down and adjust the edge of the seam here. It's not sticking out a huge amount to get the end of the dart to lie flat with the seam when it's actually cut out. So there's not a massive amount of difference to make there. So the difference would be whether I want my dart angling slightly downwards or straight across. Now, as I'm only going down 1/2 inch, I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference one way or the other. So the simplest option is obviously just to remark the point and draw the legs in to where they already are, and I think that's the option I'm going to go with. So I'll get that marked in, and then we're ready to cut off the excess paper for the front piece. Okay, so the new dart is marked in. As you can see, I've folded the paper a bit. That's to check that the dart, once it's sewn up, is going to sit flat with the edge of the side seam. I have tweaked the side seam slightly to blend that in. It's not going to make any difference to the fit. We're talking about a 1/16 of an inch. So yeah, barely anything there. Okay, so time to trim off the excess paper, and then we can do the adjustments to the back. Okay, so I've remarked where the pin tucks are going to go at the back neck. So if we look on the toile, where they were originally positioned, the central two sit on top of each other, and I don't really want them to sit neatly next to each other because you sort of lose the effect a bit otherwise. So I've moved them over slightly so we've got a bit more space between them. So that way it should sort of line up a bit more similarly to the front. And I've also adjusted the arm sight at the back here. It has straightened out the back here a bit more, but again I can adjust that as I sew it if I need to. It should be fine. I've not taken much out underneath the arm, which is where it's fitting fine. I've not added any onto the shoulder point where it's fitting fine. It's just this section that I've marked here is where it was pulling. So that's where I really needed the additional length. But if I need to re-seam it and taper this bit out a bit more, I can do. And as I say, I can always look at adding in a gusset if need be, which will reintroduce a bit of length into the underarm and give range of movement and that kind of thing. So all that's left to do is the sway back adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through what I'm going to do for the sway back adjustment. This is the back of the shirt toile. It's not hemmed, so that's going to be useful. Because obviously I've put the collar on to just check how the collar fitted, and to also have a practice at putting the collar on. I need to do better on the corners. They're meant to be curved, but hey ho. So I've pinned up this section here, which is the fabric that I want to remove from the pattern. So it's going to be like a wedge taken out the middle of the back, keeping the side seams the same length. So what I'm going to need to do is find the middle of the back of the shirt and measure from the hem to where I've pinned. So where the pin's showing through on this side. And I'm going to mark that on my pattern. The reason I need to do it in the middle is because that's where the widest point is going to be, and also this fabric is cut on the fold. So I'm going to be measuring up the straight edge of the pattern piece to find that place. Then I need to measure the distance of the fabric that's been folded over, so this pleated bit here, and mark that as well on the pattern piece. Then I can taper it out either side to the side seams and cut that bit of paper out of the pattern, tape them together and straighten up the fold line again. So it's a few steps to be done. So I'll get that done and I'll show you what it looks like on the pattern piece once it's done. This is going to mean that the shirt won't have as much excess fabric where my back curves in before my bottom, but it won't affect the overall length of the shirt because the side seam is going to be the same length and it's excess fabric. So where my back is a little bit shorter than the pattern, effectively. So yeah, so I could have done it with darts, like fisheye darts would have also taken in that excess fabric, but then you're going to lose the effect of the pleats at the top. And yeah, so I think the sway back is a better choice in this circumstance. The darts will do something slightly different as well, because obviously they're vertical rather than horizontal, and we actually want to take fabric out horizontally across the width of the pattern piece. Okay, so for me, I needed to make my sway back adjustment 11 inches up from the seam allowance on the hem, and it needed to be 1 1/8 of an inch wide at its widest point. So I marked those 2 points on the fold line. Then I marked the centre point between those two marks, and I've used my French curve to create this wedge. So it's not a direct triangle, because I do need fabric removed for quite a distance across my back. But I've tapered it out to where the stitch line is. So that's my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance marked in at this end. So now I'm going to cut down one of the legs of this curvy wedge and remove that fabric from the pattern piece. It is going to do funky things at this side. So yes, I'm going to cut down one leg to just before the seam allowance, and I'll cut into the seam allowance as well so that I can pivot those two bits of fabric or two bits of paper and pattern piece together. And yeah, then we'll even out the fold line because obviously that needs to be straight. Okay, so I've slashed my pattern and it occurs to me the curved line was pointless because when I rotate this cut edge up to meet the top of my wedge, the curves are going in opposite directions, so I can't meet them all the way along. But that's fine. It's still going to have the same overall effect. It's just maybe not going to have as much finesse as I had in my head, but that's okay. So yes, bring the cut edge up to meet the top marking. I'm just going to smidge it ever slightly past, just because I want to make sure I've got a good amount of width with the fabric coming out of that back piece. I mean, we're going up a 1/16 of an inch there from the line, so grand scheme of things, it's not going to make that much of a difference. So I will tape that down and then we'll straighten out the fold line. So to straighten up the fold line, the folded edge, I've put paper underneath and I've used my French rule, my French curve, the straight edge of it, to draw a line from here until we meet the straight edge at the top. So I'm going to trim that down. We'll tape down this bit first and then trim this down, and we'll be ready to cut out the final fabric. Okay, so pattern pieces are all adjusted, fabric's all cut out, we're ready to start sewing. Now I've got my sewing machine loaded up with grey thread at the moment, which is what I used for the toile, which you can see on the mannequin back there. The fabric that I'm using for the finished shirt is this mustard yellow. Now I do have a closely coordinating yellow thread, which is great, but as you can see, there's nowhere near enough of that to do a shirt in. So I'm going to use that for top stitching, for the pin tucks, for around the cuffs if I have enough. We'll see if I have enough for putting on the buttons with this. I have a different yellow that's not quite as good a match, but will be good enough. But the seams I'm going to do in the grey. Seams and stay stitching and that kind of thing. The reason for that is grey will blend in with pretty much everything, so it's a good option to use if you don't have a matching thread, and that enables me to save what little yellow thread I've got for the visible stitching, where it's a little bit more crucial that the colours match well. The odd stitch showing through on the seam in grey is not really going to show up too much. So the first thing I need to do is get some interfacing put on some of the pieces, and then it's onto the pin tucks. Now, the pin tucks do take a bit of time, and I will do a separate video on pin tucks because I think that's one that will be more useful as a standalone video that you can refer back to over time, so keep an eye out for that one. But yeah, I'm going to get started by interfacing and then marking up my pin tucks. I did try to be clever and thread mark the ends of my pin tucks, and then realise I don't really know how to do thread marking. So we'll see how it turns out when I take the pattern piece off, but I think I'm going to have to go in with chalk, which is fine. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I'll make some progress and come back to you in a bit and let you know how I'm getting on. I'm going to be French seaming this shirt, as I think that gives it a nicer finish. It does make it a little bit more awkward if I need to reopen the seams to undo any of my adjustments or tweak things further, but it will give a nicer finish. And because this fabric, it's 100% Ramie, and it does have a slight tendency to fray along the cut edges, so I do want to make sure it's nicely finished. So yeah, so let's get going with that. Okay, top tip when you're working with fabric that's the same on both sides. Mark which side you want to be the inside. I've put a little chalk mark on there, marking it on the inside so that if it doesn't wash out as thoroughly as I'd like, which it will, but just in case, it's not going to show. So yeah, so I've done that, and I've stay stitched the back piece. So I've stay stitched the arm side. I went from the shoulder down to the underarm, and I've stay stitched the back, which in both instances I went from the shoulder, on both halves, I went from the shoulder to the centre, and then from the shoulder to the centre. I use a longer stitch length for stay stitching than I would for seams, and the purpose of stay stitching is to stop your bias-ish edges from stretching whilst you're handling the fabric. So it is a useful step to do. It's not always explained why you're doing it in patterns. It sometimes just says stay stitched here. But yeah, that's the purpose of it, is to stop things stretching as you're handling the fabric. And yeah, necklines, it's always useful to do it in 2 halves. I don't know whether it's better to do it from the middle out or the shoulder in. I just do it from the shoulder in. But, yeah. Okay, so the thread marking has gone better than expected. So I find for the bust start, but I quite often use tailor's tack on the tailor's tack on the bust start. Don't always get it right, but yeah, I do usually use it there, so it marks the point of the dart quite nicely for me, and I've still got my notches on the side there. With other fabrics I would mark the legs in, but I'm not necessarily going to do that on this fabric, at least not with chalk. I could have run some stitches along there to mark the legs if I wanted to. I haven't done that. We'll just make it work. And down here we've got my thread marking for the bottom of the pin tuck, so it has kind of worked. Some of them are a bit short though, so I'm just going to go through and reinforce that with a chalk mark. I'm just going to put a dot on each of these thread markings. If I hadn't have thread marked, I would have put a pin through the paper and then marked them and done it that way. So we'll do the same on the other side, and yeah, pretty pleased with that, given that I was making these ones up as I went along. They even show through on the other side, which is ideal. So yeah, so you're just marking so that you can see on both sides. So yes, I need to put dots on these ones as well. I also need to double check which is the right side and which is the wrong side. These marks will need to be on the right side of the fabric. So I just need to work out which one's the left and which one's the right. Yeah. I've got an assistant. Not sure how helpful he is being sat right next to the sewing machine, but oh, was that enough? Yes, love you too. Okay, so that's all the pin tucks done. See the left front pin tucks there. See, they're all pressed to the middle, and the slightly different shade of yellow in the thread isn't really showing up too much. You can see some of the chalk line still, but so that will wash out and disappear in time, so yeah, that's fine. And it also means that my first tweak that I made from the toile has been done, which is the pin tucks on the back of the shirt. You can see they're lying nice and neatly facing each other. A little bit of a space between them, which just lets them lay flat. So yeah, some big improvement on the previous version, and I'll insert a shot of that for you as well, so you can see what I mean. So yeah, so that's good. And it's time for the bust starts next, which is the other adjustment that I was going to make. Now, I can't confirm whether the bust starts are exactly in the right place until I've got a bit further through the project. So I'll get those sewn up and get the shirt sort of put together. Then we'll be able to see if I've got that adjustment correct. And the other adjustment was the arm size, so that again, I won't be able to tell until I'm a little bit further through the shirt because it's all in pieces at the minute. So yeah, best get on with that. Okay, so the pin tucks are all done, the button band is on, and the darts I don't know if you can actually see the seam line from the dart there. Hopefully the camera's picking it up. Yeah, I think it might be. So the darts are sewn in and pressed. This is where having a tailor's ham would be useful for a sort of quality finish, but I don't have one. And my mannequin, it would be tempting to pin the pieces on and press the darts on her, but she's polystyrene, so I think she'd melt. So yes, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, so all my pieces are now ready to start constructing the main blouse. So shoulder seams, then insert the sleeves, then side seams, and then the cuff and collar. The collar, I didn't get the corners particularly smooth and curvy on this one, so I'm going to take my time on that when I get to it. And the cuffs involve quite a bit of faffage. So again, I'm going to take my time on those. And they've got a lap before you put the cuff on, which is a little bit fiddly. You know, it's not hard, it's just a little bit fiddly. So yeah, so we're on to construction now. And that bit always seems to go a little bit quicker, but I am aiming to do French seams on this one, so it means I have to sew all the seams twice. So for a French seam you do, and I will do it at some point, a few weeks time probably, do a French seam video so that you've got the visuals of what I mean. You sew the seams together with the wrong sides together first, which is a little counterintuitive because we're always told to sew right sides together, right sides together, right sides together. But for a French seam, you do wrong sides together, then you trim it and turn it to right sides together to do the final seam. So it encloses the edges, and it's a nice, neat finish, which is great for shirts and things. So because I'm setting the sleeves in flat, as per the instructions in the pattern, I'll be able to do French seams on the sleeve as well, which ordinarily I wouldn't necessarily bother to do French seams on a shoulder, on like where the sleeve sets in, because it's a bit on the tricky side. So yeah, so that's the plan. Now we'll be able to see if the adjustments that I've made work at that point. So let's get cracking. Okay, so here's the little plackety lapped thing that comes before the cuff. So that's done. Some gathering stitches are in at the top of the sleeve, and I'm going to insert my sleeves into my flat shirt. So as I say, I'm going to be doing French seams, so wrong sides together first, stitch them, trim them, turn them to the right side, and then sew again. So French seams take a little bit longer, they need a lot of pressing, but I do like them. One thing to bear in mind with French seaming around here is you've got a lot of curve there, so you want to be really careful that you've got a nice thin French seam there. I mean, French seams are pretty thin anyway, but you want to make sure it's got enough flexibility to curve around the shoulder and around the arm side. But otherwise, it's the same as normal. It's just being extra careful and getting it as thin as you can. Every time you do a French seam, make sure you are trimming the seam back nice and neatly and narrowly, and sewing the second line really carefully, because it's very, very annoying when you've got the little bits of frayed edge just sticking through your seam. They can be trimmed off, or you can open up and try again. I tend to just trim them off as close as possible to the stitch line, and they just sort of disappear into the seam that way. But yeah, it's a nice finish. Okay, so we're in the final stretch now. I've got the cuffs, the collar, the hem, the buttons and buttonholes to do, and then it's done. So because last time I did the toile, I didn't get the collar sewn up great, it went a bit sort of square in the corners. I actually marked on a stitch line for myself today, so hopefully that'll give me smoother corners. We shall see. Well, so far so good. They look a little curvier, so hopefully they'll turn out all right. So I've attached my collar stand, nice and neatly sewn it all the way around, and trimmed my seam allowance. Can you spot the mistake? I've only gone and sewed the outside to the inside. Which is annoying at the best of times, but I didn't notice until I trimmed the seam. Trimmed and notched it and everything. So, time to do some unpicking. And we'll see if I've got enough left to reattach it. If not, I'll have to recut it, but don't particularly want to do that. Okay, so disaster averted, and I think I've worked out why my collar stand turned out kind of squared off at the end on the toile. Now, see here, collar stand sticks out from the end of the button placket, as it should according to the instructions. And I've curved the top at the seam allowance dictated in the pattern. So far so good. But at this point, once your collar is attached to the shirt, before you flip it over, she wants you to stitch up here to bring the edge of the collar stand in line with the front of the placket. But if you do that, you're cutting off the curve. So what I've done is, instead of sewing it straight up, I've actually marked in a curve and sewn it that way, so I should still have a curvy corner. So yeah, that's my solution to that. Maybe I didn't curve it steeply enough when I stitched it together. I measured it out at 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge, which was the seam allowance stated in the pattern, so I don't know. But this should work. If it doesn't, yeah. Okay, so the collar's on. You can see it's got a bit of a rounded corner on the end of the collar stand, more so on one side than the other, but I'm not symmetrical, my clothes don't need to be. It's just like one sleeve always goes in better than the other. Okay, so that's the collar done. Now I need to put the cuffs on, then it's hemming and button band, so we are very nearly there. We'll see how far we get today, because obviously that took longer than expected, and oh darn it, one of my pin tucks is going the wrong way. I'm just going to see if I can fix that. Not quite sure how, but we'll go. Okay, little fix partway through. I'm going to finish this later when I sew the buttons on. So I've opened up the seam where that pin tuck had been folded the wrong way, so I could release it, folded it the right way, and I've marked it with a pin. So then when I come back to hand stitch on my buttons, I'll just do a bit of hand stitching there to secure that seam again. So I've marked it with the pin so I don't lose it. But importantly, I've marked it with the pin on the outside of the shirt, so when I try it on later I don't stab myself. Okay, so cuffs, hem, and then buttons. Okay, so everything's sewn up. Let's talk button placement, because that's all I've got left to do now, is buttons and buttonholes. Now, this pattern, like a lot of shirt patterns, comes with guidelines on the pattern pieces for where to place the buttons. However, they don't always line up how it matches your body. You want to make sure you've got a button in the fullest part of your bust or your chest, areas that are going to pull. So for me, I'd want one about there. In the pattern, I believe she has you put buttonholes all the way up to the collar. I can't see me ever buttoning up the shirt higher than kind of here. So I don't know if I'll bother with the top couple of buttons. We'll see. Might do it for appearance, but I'm probably not going to use them. So yes, I've got buttonholes put in, and I'm going to start by placing one there, and then I'm going to measure out from there to make sure they're evenly placed. I will use the guidelines from the pattern piece for the cuffs because they're cuffs. But yeah, buttons down the front, you want to make sure you're addressing areas that are going to pull. So for me, that's across the bust, possibly across the belly, but definitely across the bust. And once they're in, I've got a bit of, obviously, thread ends to sort out and that kind of thing. But yeah, but hand sewing on with buttons. So we're very, very nearly done. Just a load of buttonholes to stitch and some hand finishing. So once that's all done, I'll get a twirl or some photos to insert in for you as well. And we'll have a look at how good a job I've done of fitting, as that was the focus with this project. There are a couple of areas where I would have liked a slightly better finish, mostly this sleeve. But in general, the focus was on fit rather than finish. So we'll analyse that a little bit and see how well my adjustments have done. And what I would do differently next time, if anything. So yeah, let's go on with that. Okay, so here's the shirt, all done. So, reminder of the changes that I made. I moved the bust dart, so I moved the point of the bust dart. It was up here and quite a lot further over. So I've pushed it back and dropped it down, so it's now pointing at my fullest part and stopping an inch or so away from the apex. I then added 1/2 inch to the front of the arm side and to the back of the arm side. As you can see, there's a lot less pulling across the front. There's still a little bit of pulling, so I probably could have got away with maybe another 1/4 inch on each side. But it's not too bad. So yeah, so pretty happy with that. I'm going to make a note that I can put a little bit more on the front of the arm size if I was to make it again. Now if we look at the back, and I'll put up a back shot of me in this shirt here. In fact, I think I'll put it up against the toile, possibly, so that we can see the comparison. So I did a sway back adjustment and I added on 1/2 inch to the back of the arm size. So yeah, I could probably get away with another inch or so taken out of the back in this sway back adjustment. Can't do anything about that now once the shirt's made up, because that would involve cutting fabric out. But again, I'll make a note for if I come back to this pattern at any point in time. And I've also added on the 1/2 inch at the back of the arm size as well. Again, I could have got away with another 1/4 inch perhaps there, but it is an improved fit from the toile, and that's the main thing. Overall though, I am really pleased. I like the length of the sleeves. It's comfortable, and the pin tucks are doing a nice job of effectively giving me the illusion of a waist, because they sort of pull in the fabric a little bit and then flare out across the bottom, so we've got a bit more fullness at the bottom of the shirt. It is kind of creating a little bit more definition than I would otherwise have, and that's always a good thing. So yeah, so really pleased. As I said, I'm going to make a note of the additional changes that I'll do if I come back and make the pattern again, but this is fine. This is an improved fit. That was the aim. Next job up is to work on the toile for the butterick dress. I want to say 6018, 6015, 60 something. So I'll be working on the toile of that over the next few weeks, so obviously keep an eye out for some videos on that coming up. I'm also going to do a how I did the pin tucks video at some point in the next few weeks as well, so keep an eye out for those. And in the meantime, you might enjoy this video that's up on screen now.